So the title of this talk is Big Tech and Online Censorship, How Can We Solve a Problem Like Misinformation? How can we solve a problem like misinformation? Well, in order to solve a problem, you have to understand what the problem is. So what do we mean by misinformation or disinformation? A quick Google search of disinformation will tell you that, according to the Cambridge online dictionary, that disinformation is false information spread in order to deceive people. Well, to me that sounds quite a lot like lying, as it was previously known. And misinformation, according to the same source, is wrong information or the fact that people are misinformed. That sounds quite a lot like incorrectness to me, although it does confer the notion that the beholder in any given case has a hold on what constitutes the truth, and that's something that I will come back to. You see, the thing is, in 2022, the concepts of being misleading or incorrect have really been left behind for alternative terms with loaded connotations, and the terms misinformation and disinformation have grown to become part of the political lexicon. In recent years, moral panics about truth and accuracy have led many people to believe that the Western world is tied up in webs of propaganda being spun by malign actors manipulating all of our thoughts. Perhaps these fears are not unfounded. It's without doubt that there is a crisis of trust taking place in the Western world. And is this really surprising? In my lifetime, the UK government has led us into war based on falsehoods. There have been scandals at the very top of public life. And sometimes those who we outsource policy making to, based on their expertise, do get it wrong. What lies at the heart of those examples sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Yet when governments made false claims about our security or newspapers misrepresented miscarriages of justice, nobody used the terms mis or disinformation. The problem is misinformation and disinformation are malleable terms. They're often deployed in ways to discredit or silence another individual's argument in the course of public debate. And as I said before, they often confer a notion that a person or group has a monopoly on the truth. The panic about misinformation and disinformation has real-world policy consequences. It's not a coincidence that the proliferation of those terms has come about in an age where our speech is more democratised than at any other time in history. You or I could write a post, send a message, tweet, and it could be read by someone in the US or in India or in Australia instantaneously. Where newspapers and politicians once had a monopoly on speech, as the gatekeepers of expression which made it into the public domain, now any of us has the opportunity and the ability to project our voices and to be able to create our own audiences. Information is power, and unfortunately some people want to put the genie back into the bottle. The misinformation panic has culminated in big tech under the threat of government regulation, increasingly taking on the role of online speech police. During the coronavirus era, this reached new extremes, as many of you will know. This period saw the state come into our lives like never before, with the desire to control extending even to the spread of ideas. At the beginning of the pandemic, Facebook took the step of removing content which promoted face masks as a tool to combat the spread of COVID-19. Yet within a very short space of time, the medical consensus on masks had changed. But rather than acknowledge that it was wrong, Facebook then flipped its position and censored in the other direction. A high-profile example of this saw Facebook label, discredit and suppress an article in The Spectator magazine written by the Oxford academic Carl Hennigan disputing the efficacy of masks. What grounds or competency Silicon Valley's fact-checkers had to overrule reasoned arguments by a professor of evidence-based medicine still remains to be seen. Not content with censoring and fact-checking academics, big tech went after the British Medical Journal, one of the world's oldest and most influential general medical journals. According to the journal, a peer-reviewed piece documenting an investigation into clinical trial research practices occurring at Ventavia, that is a company which assisted with the main Pfizer trial, was labelled as partly false, and it was suppressed on Facebook. Despite being fully evidenced and error-free, Lead Stories, a company that conducts around half of all fact-checking on Facebook, said the article was missing context and stated that the whistleblower at the heart of the investigation had failed to express unreserved support for COVID vaccines. The fact-checking company later commented that it was concerned about who was sharing the article online. In other words, the documentation of research and investigation in some areas is not permitted if it risks causing the infantilised public to stray from their designated path. This is a reminder that we're talking about the British Medical Journal. In a statement, the editor of the BMJ, Cameron Abbasi, said, "We should all be very worried that Facebook, a multi-billion-dollar company, is effectively censoring fully fact-checked journalism that is raising legitimate concerns about the conduct of clinical trials. Facebook's actions won't stop the BMJ doing what is right. But the real question is, why is Facebook acting in this way? What is driving its worldview? Is it ideology? Is it commercial interests? Is it incompetence? Users should be worried that, despite presenting itself as a neutral social media platform, Facebook, not fact check, is trying to control how people think under the guise of fact-checking." I think there's some very good questions there. So, what is it that's causing these platforms to censor? Is it based on ideology, a revolving door between the political class in Washington and Silicon Valley? Is it out of self-interest, to safeguard corporate reputation? Perhaps it's the threat of the state, or maybe platforms are simply preempting regulation. And how can we overcome this crisis in trust? Can you ever censor your way to the truth? And lastly, why is it that a Conservative government is pushing legislation which treats free speech as something that can be harmful? These are all questions that we need to answer, and fast. Panics about the veracity of information and waning public trust are causing those in power to reach for the levers of censorship. And it's not just the tech censors of Silicon Valley that we have to worry about. A clandestine, unaccountable government unit, little known to the public, called the Counter-Disinformation Unit, is charged with poring over our online speech and telling the platforms to take down content which, and I quote a government minister here, is inappropriate. Meanwhile, the Censors Charter that is the Online Safety Bill is hurtling down the track towards us, threatening to compound these problems by granting the state overwhelming executive power to designate categories of free speech as harmful. These are all challenges that we have to face up to as free citizens living in a democracy today. This really is the new front line in the battle to protect free expression, and we cannot afford to get it wrong. Thank you very much.